Welcome back to into today's video, first video of 2014. I hope you all had a lovely and a very happy new year. We're going to have a look at the charts for the next few days in a few moments. We're also going to have a look at the Central England temperature and see what happened in 2013 and where things perhaps could be going as we move on into 2014. So, all very interesting. Before I get on with that, just want to talk about the advertising with video ads, my pages at GazWebBiz.com. If you hit play on the video ad, you'll be sporting GazWebBiz.com. Thanks very much for doing that. So let's start off with the mean Central England temperature for 2014 from Hadley at the UK Met Office. It's changed the page, got rid of all the monthly Central England temperature numbers for 2013 and replaced it with a new graph, which we're going to be looking at quite a lot, I think, over the next year for 2014. So we've just got one day's Central England temperature left for 2014, or I should say we've just got one day's Central England temperature in for 2014. The Central England temperature for January the 1st came out at 7.6, very mild day. Despite the fact it was pouring with rain, was very mild. An anomaly of 4.1 degrees above average, so we've had a very, very mild start to 2014. It'll be interesting to see whether that mild start to January is maintained for the rest of the month, or whether we start to see things cooling off through the course of the month. But certainly the first day of the month really was very warm. Mind you, I don't think that's anywhere near the warmest on record. I would suspect you could find some even warmer days than that over the last few hundred years. Central England temperature actually goes back to the year 1659. It's the longest and oldest data set temperature record anywhere in the world. So 2013, which is down here, is in now. The monthly returns for the whole of the year are in, and indeed we also have the temperature, the average temperature in Central England for the year as a whole. Have a look at that in a moment. Let's see what happened with December first of all. December came in at 6.3 degrees in Central England. So it was actually only the warmest since 2006. We didn't pull it off and get the warmest since 1988. 2006 was warmer. December 2006 at 6.5 degrees. However, it was for the first time since 1993 warmer December than November, because November Central England temperature came in at 6.2 degrees. December comes in at 6.3. That's the first time that's happened, as I say, since way back in 1993, when we have 5.5 for December and 4.6 for November 1993. So that's quite significant that December has been warmer than November for the first time in what is that? That's about 20 years, isn't it? So that is quite an unusual occurrence. Now, 2013 was a very unusual year in that the first 6 months of the year were all cold, so we can go from January through to June, and those temperatures were all below average, particularly focused on March, of course, at 2.7, which was the coldest March, well, since Victorian times, about 1883, I think, on the Central England data set, but on the UK data set it's just the coldest since 1962, but it was a very, very cold March. But all the months from January through to June were colder than average, and then the second half of the year was very, very warm. So we had that very hot July, the hottest month since July 2006, just there. July came out at 18.3. We had a very warm August as well, not quite as hot as July, but even so it was warm, 16.9. September was a little bit cooler. It was near normal actually, so it wasn't particularly warm in September, but then the warmth came back in October, 12.5, very warm month. November was cooler, not desperately cold, but it was a little bit cooler than average. And then of course we've had the very mild December coming out warmer than the month that preceded it. So once you average it all out, the yearly temperature is 9.56. So we've actually come out pretty much near normal, I think, in terms of the Central England temperature for the year as a whole, and that's because the cold start was offset by the warm end, warm second half, and so averaging it all out, it comes out around the average. But that's a colder year than we've been used to for many recent years. It's only the coldest since 2010, which comes out at 8.83. That's a very, very cold year, but generally it is a colder year than we've been used to for the last sort of 20 years, and we can see that through the last 20 years have many of these years coming out with central temperatures above 10 Celsius, particularly through the middle and latter part of the 1990s and going into the middle of the 2000s. Most years then came out above 10 Celsius. We just have 2 years, 1996 and 2001, which were colder, but most years through that period, from the middle of the 1990s to the middle of the 2000s, come out with central temperatures above 10 Celsius. But we have seen a clear reduction in the number of years that are churning out these 10 Celsius average temperatures through the course of the year since around 2007. Actually, I always pinpoint the summer floods of 2007 as being the year, being the time when the weather patterns started to change, and there's been a very obvious reduction in the central England temperature since 2007. We can see it on this graph here. This shows central England temperature going back to 1772 up to the present day, 2013. And what's interesting is that from around 1976 through to around 2007, we get this very clear increase in the central England temperature through that period. But from 2007, we've seen a very clear and very rapid drop in the central England temperature. The red line here is showing us the central England temperature going up as an average, and then definitely since 2007 coming down again. It's very interesting how that's happened. And as I pinpoint the summer floods of the year 2007 as being the time when the weather patterns started to change just a little bit. But what's going to be interesting is whether we've now changed back with the hot summer, and now it appears we're having a milder winter, whether we're changing back to a pre-2007 scenario, which was the time when all these warm years were being churned out, and this line here, this red line, is going up. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in 2014, whether we're going to revert back and we're going to have a very warm year, or whether we're going to continue with this general reduction in the central England temperature, although we're starting off on a very mild note for January, but by no means it's going to continue through the year. We might have a cold summer or a cold spring or a cold autumn. So it's going to be interesting to see how 2014 plays out. Will we go back to having another 10 Celsius average central England temperature for the year? We had one in 2011, but there's generally, as I say, been a reduction in those years, churning out very warm yearly central England temperatures since 2007. Or will we continue to have cooler years? And as I say, these last two, 2012, 2013, despite being around the average, 9.7 for 2012, 9.5 for 2013, that's around the 30-year average, so not particularly cold, but it's colder than we was used to through much of the 1990s and early and middle part of the 2000s. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Let's have a look at the stratospheric temperatures. We've got a warming going on the Pacific side, the Asian side of the Arctic just at the moment in terms of the temperature in the stratosphere. That's going to continue for a few days. It's not a sudden stratospheric warming, but it is enough to put some pressure on this raging and very cold polar vortex that we've got over the top of the stratosphere. Remember, when we've got a cold polar vortex, it basically means that we've got very intense areas of low pressure over the pole, which spawns all of these stormy systems that we're seeing coming through the Atlantic. We do keep it quite warm on the Pacific side, the Asian side of the Arctic, but it doesn't really infiltrate this polar vortex, to be honest. Much of the North Pole actually staying very cold in terms of the stratosphere. Now, for a few days, the GFS model was indicating we might get some sort of a warming event, probably not a sudden stratospheric warming, but a warming event around Canada and Greenland. It's dropping the idea now. Let's run through the latest charts, and we see that, well, a little bit of a warming tries to occur there on the 12th of January, just to the south of Greenland, but it doesn't really infiltrate into Greenland, and actually it just runs away into Scandinavia, sort of fades away. We have another go at it around the 18th, right at the very end of the GFS run, but again, that's not really showing much signs of infiltrating the North Pole. But at the same time, the polar vortex is continuously being put under stress by these warming events that are occurring on the Pacific side. So we are seeing a weakening as we go through January of the polar vortex, of the cold stratosphere. But that idea that we're going to get a big warming, not a sudden stratospheric warming, but a big warming around Canada and Greenland. But GFS is dropping it for now. It may bring it back, we'll have to keep an eye on it, but it's certainly dropping that idea for now. So just have a look at the generic charts for the next week to 10 days, and this is the GFS low pressure to the north of Scotland, feeding in means westerly winds in a week's time. Thursday the 9th, no change really in the pattern up to that point. And as we go beyond that towards Sunday the 12th, staying generally westerly with more areas of low pressure trying to come in. And then as we get through towards the middle of the month, this is Tuesday the 14th, we go beyond that Saturday the 18th, right to the end of the GFS world. There is the suggestion that we're trying to build high pressure up over Scandinavia, but these low pressure systems are still very strong and powerful coming in from the west, so we may have a bit of a battleground then in the second half of the month. That could eventually turn it cold from the east, but the danger is, of course, if it's the irresistible force meeting the immovable object, we'll just continue to have low pressure coming up against that high pressure. We'll have weather fronts stuck in the flow, producing copious amounts of rain, and it'll never get cold. We'll just keep southerly winds going. That happened really in the second half of December 2012, you may remember. And if that happened, that would be disastrous news for anybody flooded out, because it would actually make things worse in terms of the flooding situation if we started to get weather fronts strung out, not being able to clear off into the North Sea. That would be very bad news indeed. So we've got to keep an eye on that, what's happening with that Scandinavian high. May eventually turn things cold, but it could keep us locked in a very mild southerly flow and get those weather fronts stuck over the country. The ECMWF does show pressure trying to rise to the north in a week's time, but low pressure is still basically dominating off the Atlantic as we go into day 10. Well, look at this, low pressure very much breezing through, no sign of any Scandinavian highs there. It really is the Atlantic all the way continuing to drive the pattern. It stays very unsettled, but at least we won't be getting those weather fronts stuck across the country. But that's a very unsettled day 10 from the ECMWF this morning. And finally, the GEM, the Canadian model, shows back for a week's time, Thursday the 9th of January. We're bringing more weather systems through across the country, so there'll be more rain, no doubt, falling. But as we get through to day 10, quite interesting, the GM is building up the blocking more around Greenland and Iceland, and consequently we're starting to drive these low pressures southwards and maybe getting a little bit of undercutting underneath the high pressure. That is undoubtedly the coldest chart of the morning from the GM. That could be bringing some snow actually to northern parts of the country. It's probably a bit progressive in doing that. I would suspect that it's going to be the second half of the month before we was to see blocking of enough strength really to start to bring colder air in. But it is interesting that the GEM is seeing that, and it could be a precursor to where things may be going in the second half of January. But in summary, it's going to stay very unsettled for the first 10 days of the month anyway, with more heavy rain. And then as we go towards the middle of the month, we've got to look out for whether we do get some blocking beginning to appear. If we do, does it lock in weather fronts across the country as we were seeing on that GFS scenario? That would be very, very bad news for flooding. Then in the longer term, 2014, is it going to continue the trend that we're seeing since 2007 for gradually reducing the central England temperatures for the year as a whole, or will we revert back to a very warm year, the kind of thing that we had before 2007? It's going to be interesting to see how that goes. I think I'm a bit uncertain about what's going to happen this year. It could go either way, so that's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out for the year as a whole. That's it for now. We'll probably do the January forecast tomorrow, so thanks for watching. Bye for now.